Well, it finally happened. David Wood has gone head to head with Alex O'Connor recently in a debate on whether or not Jesus claimed to be God. So today on Pastor React, we are going to be reacting to the debate that they recently had in California. But first, for those of you that are new to the channel, my name is Chris. I'm a rural pastor in Canada, and this channel exists to help you to become the leader that the world desperately needs you to be. So one of the things that leaders need to do is leaders need to be able to build the discernment to know the difference between a good argument and a bad argument. And let me tell you, the YouTube world is absolutely filled with bad arguments. And so today we are going to be evaluating whether or not the Christians are able to make a good argument or whether or not the atheists are able to make the better of the two arguments. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Here in my opening statement, I'm going to briefly discuss the forgotten Jewish idea that's most relevant for understanding how Jesus claimed to be God. And then I'll show how this forgotten Jewish idea illuminates various passages in the New Testament. Some of you are familiar with the early Jewish belief in the two powers in heaven. Alan Siegel, a Jewish scholar, drew attention to this in his 1977 book, Two Powers in Heaven. And lots of people, especially Christians, have been interested in the topic ever since. Here's the idea in a nutshell. The Old Testament is very clear that there's one true God. But there are numerous passages in the Old Testament where we see two divine figures. I'll give a few quick examples. There are tons of these. Sometimes God seems to be in two different places doing two different things.
Okay, so this is a very interesting argument. So the topic of the debate is, did Jesus claim to be God, right? So normally, like I've seen lots of different people, they've had this debate in the past, and usually you go into the Gospels and you try and pick out some phrases that Jesus said or maybe some phrases that Jesus didn't say, and you try and prove whether or not Jesus actually made the claims that he was God, or that he never made the claim that he was God. So this may be the most interesting argument I've ever heard for Jesus claiming to be God. So the two powers in heaven is a very interesting theological argument. So the basic idea between the two powers in heaven is this is actually the basic principle that the Trinity didn't just come out of nowhere. There are lots of myths about how the Christian church invented the concept of the Trinity in the late 300s AD, right? Like there was like this hidden council and these bishops got together and they invented the Trinity, right? So the two powers in heaven is actually an ancient Jewish doctrine in which they actually believe that they are at least two Yahwehs. And so the basic principle here is that after the Jesus movement started and Jesus was so clearly portrayed to be the Messiah, and then this idea of Trinity, not only there's two powers in heaven, but there's actually three powers in heaven, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Later on, in the next couple centuries, the rabbis, they would actually declare this doctrine to be a heresy because it's too closely connected with Christianity. And so they would completely get rid of this doctrine of the two powers in heaven. And so this is very interesting. I've never actually seen anybody attempt this argument in a debate. So let's see how David Wood does with this.
A common example is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. The Lord appears to Abraham and tells him that he's going down to Sodom and Gomorrah to see firsthand how bad the people are. So he goes down to Sodom and Gomorrah. And what happens? Genesis 19:24, then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. The Lord on earth rained down fire from the Lord out of heaven. This thing reboot every couple minutes. It sounds like there are two lords here.
Okay, so we're just going to fact check him really quickly here. Okay, so let's see if what he claims about Genesis 19 is true. All right? All right, Genesis 19:23. The sun had risen on the earth, and when Lot came to Zoar, then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. Okay, so this is actually from the ESV, right? So it's not like he's not making something up out of thin air. Like this verse reads like this in every major English translation. It always says the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah fire and sulfur from the Lord. So here's another interesting thing too. Every time in the Old Testament the word Lord is spelled in all caps. You see that? Capital L-O-R-D. Every time you see that, that is the divine name Yahweh being used, right? So look at this. It says, the Lord, all caps, rained down on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. So it literally reads, in Hebrew, it literally reads, Yahweh rained down fire and sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from Yahweh out of heaven. So what's going on? There's two Yahwehs, my friends. Right? So this is a very interesting argument that David Wood is implementing here.
Watch what happens in Zechariah 2. Pay attention or you'll miss it. Come, Zion, escape, you who live in daughter Babylon. For this is what the Lord Almighty says. Who's speaking? The Lord Almighty. And he says, after the glorious one has sent me, the Lord was sent by the glorious one, against the nations that have plundered you, for whoever touches you touches the apple of his eye. I will surely raise my hand against them, so that their slaves will plunder them. Then you will know that the Lord Almighty has sent me. The Lord Almighty was sent by the Lord Almighty. Next paragraph. Shout and be glad, daughter Zion, for I am coming, and I will live among you, declares the Lord, Yahweh. Many nations will be joined with the Lord in that day and will become my people. I will live among you, and you will know that the Lord Almighty has sent me to you. The Lord, Yahweh, will live among them, and they will know that the Lord was sent by the Lord Almighty. So Yahweh rains down fire from Yahweh. Yahweh is sent by Yahweh. Plenty of passages like these. This is all over the place in the Old Testament, from Genesis all the way to the prophets. We just don't pay attention to it when we're reading. But there were ancient Jews who paid very close attention to passages like these. And they realized that something very, very strange is going on. There's one God, but there were two powers, two authorities in heaven. If you put all of the passages together, it seems like there's God you can't be around because his presence would destroy you, and God you can be around somehow. There's God you can't be around and God you can be around. The God you can't be around is distinct from the God you can be around. They interact with each other. One sends the other, and yet they're both God. This was all very, very confusing to first century Jews. If there's one God, why are there two powers in heaven?
Okay, so I know this may sound to you like a bold claim, and it is a bold claim, and the bold claim is also true. Okay, so all through the Torah and into the prophets, you do get this idea where it is like there are two powers in heaven, right? And not only two powers in heaven, but the one power comes down and he hangs out with people for a while, right? Like I'm actually reading through the book of Exodus right now in my devotions, and one character that pops up a lot is the angel of the Lord. And primarily in Exodus, the angel of Yahweh, whenever he shows up, he talks, and it's the angel. And then in the next verse, the angel speaks. But instead of saying that the angel spoke, it will say the Lord said, right? Like this happens to Moses at the burning bush, where it says that the angel of the Lord was in the bush, and then it says, and then the Lord said to Moses. And it's like, okay, who's talking? The angel of the Lord? The angel of Yahweh? or Yahweh? And the answer is yes. Like the angel of Yahweh is Yahweh. But also at the same time, later on in Exodus, Moses wants to see the face of Yahweh, and God tells Moses, you can't see my face. If you saw my face, it would be too much for you, and you'd be struck down, like you'd be struck dead, right? And so what David Wood is saying, though it may sound pretty bold, it's actually completely true. Everything he has said so far is 100% accurate. And so let's see where he goes with this.
Why are there two powers who both act like God? They tried to deal with this problem in a number of ways, but mainly they were confused. And then Jesus came along. And he says, in effect, you know those two powers that you've been reading about in the scriptures? You know those two powers that you're so confused by? I can tell you about those two powers because I'm one of them. That's the primary way Jesus claims to be God. It's the primary way his followers claim that he's God. And it's the primary way, it's the primary issue that enrages his opponents. But did Jesus really claim to be one of the two powers in heaven? Since Jesus is a highly controversial figure, and since there's a skeptic in our midst, I would suggest that if we want to know what someone like Jesus is claiming about himself, we can look at 6 things. We can look at what Jesus says and what Jesus does, what he says and does as they relate to our topic. We can look at what his friends say and what his friends do. Here I mean what they say and do in reaction to him. And we can look at what his enemies say and what his enemies do, again, in reaction to him. So what Jesus says, what Jesus does, what his friends say, what his friends do, what his enemies say, what his enemies do. I would put all of that together and say that's our evidence that we need to account for, and that will give us the best indication of what Jesus was claiming about himself. I don't have a ton of time left, so we'll consider a few things Jesus says and does and a few things his friends say and do. Along the way, we'll see the reactions of some of his enemies, and maybe I'll add a few more examples in the rebuttals. What does Jesus say? Jesus claims to be one of the two powers in heaven in multiple ways. I'll give you 3. The most familiar is the Father-Son language he uses. Jesus claims to be the Son of God. Now, someone can be a son of God in various ways in the Bible. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. But Jesus claims to be the Son of God in a unique divine sense. One example, Matthew 11:27, all things have been handed over to me by my Father. And no one knows the Son except the Father. And no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. All things were handed over to the Son by the Father. No one knows the Son except the Father. Obviously, the people around Jesus knew him in some sense, but they didn't really know him. Only the Father really knows him. And no one knows the Father except the Son and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. No one can know the Father unless the Son chooses to reveal him. This should sound somewhat similar to the Old Testament idea that there's God you can't be around and God you can be around. Two powers, Father and Son. Jesus is the Son. Mark 12. While Jesus was teaching in the temple courts, he asked, why do the teachers of the law say that the Messiah is the son of David? David himself, speaking by the Holy Spirit, declared, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. David himself calls him Lord. How then can he be his son? Whose son is the Messiah? He's the son of David, but David calls the Messiah his Lord. How many lords do we have here? The Lord said to my Lord. According to Jesus, the second Lord here, the Lord of King David, is the Messiah. So we've got two powers in heaven, and Jesus is one of them. On a side note, if you're a Christian and you're wondering why we're talking about two powers instead of 3, where's the Holy Spirit? He's there, but we're focusing on how Jesus claimed to be God, and that's connected to the two powers in heaven. Mark 14. Again, the high priest asked him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. And the high priest tore his garments and said, what further witnesses do we need? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision? And they all condemned him as deserving death. What do the enemies say? This is blasphemy. What do they do? Tear their garments. That's what they do when they're outraged about blasphemy, and condemn him as deserving death. Why do they react like that? The Son of Man, that's Jesus' favorite title for himself, will be seated at the right hand of power. So there's the power, which sounds like God, and there's...
So what is David Wood getting at? David Wood is saying this. At the time, the Jews knew about all these verses that David Wood has brought up, right? They knew that in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the Torah says Yahweh rained down fire from Yahweh in heaven, right? They knew about what's going on in the prophets. They knew about what some of the Psalms say about these two powers. And so the people were fully aware. And so the question is, in Mark 14, 61 through 64, Jesus is on trial by the Jewish leaders in the Sanhedrin. And all Jesus does is he quotes from the book of Daniel, and Jesus calls himself the Son of Man. And he tells them, when he is asked, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" And he says, "I am." And then they tear their robes and they're ready to crucify him for blasphemy, right? Here's the problem. Claiming to be a son of man was not blasphemy. The only way for this to be blasphemy is Jesus is using the term the Son of Man in a messianic divine way, right? And so that's what David is getting at.
There's the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. How many powers in heaven? I see two here, and Jesus claims to be one of them. So who is Jesus claiming to be at his Jewish trial? He's claiming to be the Son of Man prophesied in Daniel 7:13-14. Daniel says, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed."
Okay, that's why he was charged with blasphemy. Okay, look at what Jesus is doing. Jesus is quoting from Daniel 7:13 and 14, right? And so Daniel 7:13 and 14 actually says, in the vision, he saw one like a son of man, right? A son of man just means a son of Adam, right? That's actually all that means. In fact, there are verses in Ezekiel where Ezekiel uses the term son of man, or in Hebrew, it would be something like son of Adam. And it just means a human, right? So what's going on in this scripture in Daniel? In Daniel, he actually says, in the vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, right? So there was a human, is what he's saying. And there was a human coming on the clouds of heaven. See, this is weird because humans can't ride clouds, right? Only God can ride the clouds. And so Daniel 7 says, he approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. And he was given authority, glory, and sovereign power, and all nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. This is why it's blasphemy. Why? Because only God can be worshipped. That's the problem. That's the blasphemy.
So there's the Ancient of Days, God, but there's also the Son of Man, who will be worshipped by all nations, whose dominion is everlasting, and who comes with the clouds. In the Old Testament, Yahweh is the one who rides the clouds. Humans don't, angels don't. Isaiah 19, see, the Lord rides on a swift cloud. Psalm 104, the Lord wraps himself in light as with a garment. He stretches out the heavens like a tent and lays the beams of his upper chambers on the waters. He makes the clouds his chariot and rides on the wings of the wind. So God comes with the clouds. So we've got the Ancient of Days, who sounds like God, and we've got the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven, who sounds like God. Two powers in heaven, and Jesus claims to be one of them. Jesus claims to be one of the two powers in heaven multiple times, multiple ways, in multiple sources. Jesus says a lot more than that, but what does Jesus do? Jesus judges the world. In the Old Testament, David says, "The Lord abides forever. He has established his throne for judgment, and he will judge the world in righteousness." Who's the judge here? Yahweh. But in Matthew 25, Jesus declares, "But when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them from one another as the shepherd separates the sheep from the goats." Jesus goes on to say that he will admit certain people into heaven and cast others into hell. Why is Jesus the final judge? He tells us in John 5, "For the Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father. Whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him." If you don't honor God you can be around, you don't honor God you can't be around. Jesus also raises the dead at the resurrection. According to the Old Testament, Yahweh is the one who raises the dead. 1 Samuel 2:6, "The Lord kills and makes alive. He brings down to Sheol and raises up." But Jesus says he's the one who raises the dead at the resurrection. John 5, "Truly, truly, I say to you, an hour is coming and now is, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. For just as the Father has life in himself, even so he gave to the Son also to have life in himself, and he gave him authority to execute judgment because he is the Son of Man. Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming in which all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and will come forth, those who did the good deeds to a resurrection of life, those who committed the evil deeds to a resurrection of judgment." So Jesus claims by what he says and what he does that he's one of these two powers in heaven, and that means he's claiming to be God.
Okay, so you kind of get his point. David's main argument is simply this: he takes on this old Jewish doctrine about the two powers in heaven. In these scriptures from the Gospels, Jesus is connecting himself with the Son of Man from the book of Daniel, in which, in the book of Daniel, the Son of Man is the second power. How do we know he's the second power? Because God gives him a throne in heaven, right? So now there's two thrones in heaven at least. There's a throne for Yahweh, and now there's a throne for the Son of Man. And how do we know that the Son of Man is Yahweh? Because the nations worship him as God, right? And so what David Wood is saying is that Jesus, in the Gospels, Jesus is claiming to be God by saying, "I am the second power in heaven," because the Son of Man in the book of Daniel is the second power in heaven. And his secondary argument for Jesus claiming to be the second power in heaven is that throughout the Gospels, Jesus says he's going to do the things that only Yahweh is supposed to do at the end of time, right? According to the Old Testament, Yahweh is supposed to judge the wicked and the dead. Yahweh is supposed to right the wrongs that were done throughout history. And in the Gospels, Jesus says he's the one that's going to judge the dead, and he's the one that's going to right the wrongs that have been done throughout history. And so the only way for that to happen is if Jesus is the second Yahweh, right? And so that is David Wood's main argument, which is an interesting argument, to say the least. Okay, so now we're going to go to Alex O'Connor's argument, and we're going to see what Alex has to say.
I want to begin with a verse from the Old Testament which might become relevant momentarily, and that is, well, a psalm, not in its entirety, but Psalm 82. Psalm 82 is a curious psalm because it opens by saying that God presides in the great assembly. He renders judgment among the gods. Elohim. That is definitely the word for gods. This seems to be an indication that God is talking about, or the psalmist is talking about, the so-called divine council, which also shows up in Job, for example. Later in the psalm, he says, "I said, you are gods. You are all sons of the Most High." The psalmist is referring to beings here who are definitively not Yahweh, but calling them gods, which is kind of interesting. I'm not trying to make a point out of that. Jesus is going to do that for me as we turn to what I think is the most important Christological gospel of the four, which is, of course, John's gospel. Many people
Okay, so this is interesting too. So we've had one very interesting argument get laid out through the two Yahwehs, the two powers in heaven. And now Alex O'Connor, he's giving another very interesting argument, and I kind of see where he's going with this. And he is going with the theological argument, interesting for an atheist to make a theological argument, but he is beginning his argument that Jesus did not claim to be God by referencing Psalm 82. And the theological argument he's making has to do with the doctrine of the divine council. Okay, so the doctrine of the divine council is a biblical doctrine. And basically, this is the idea that Yahweh allows, we would call them angels, to participate in decisions that gets made in heaven. And in Psalm 82, in the ESV, it literally says, God takes his place in the divine council. And so like this is very interesting. And in the Gospel of John, Jesus actually quotes from Psalm 82. But let's see where he goes with this argument.
People think that I just dismiss John's Gospel because it's written too late or something. It is, of course, the least historically reliable of the Gospels, but I'm willing to just treat it as if it's historically reliable for the purposes of this debate and see what Jesus actually says about himself. The question we're interested in here is the relationship that Jesus has to his Father. David has been speaking about the two powers in heaven heresy and saying that Jesus' relationship to the Father is the kind of relationship that the people who believed in these two powers was talking about. Well, let's investigate that in Jesus' own words. There's one place in the Gospels where Jesus is directly accused of claiming to be God. Do you know where it is? It's in John chapter 10. In John chapter 10, his Jewish opponents come to him and say, if you're the Messiah, tell us plainly. And Jesus responds by saying, I and the Father are one. I'm told by Christians this is a direct Christological claim. Who can claim to be identical to the Father except for someone who is God? And there was no confusion about this. The Jewish opponents picked up stones to stone him to death for making this claim. Now, how does Jesus respond? Does he agree with them? Or does he correct them? He says, in response to the Jews, is it not written in your law, I have said you are gods? Quoting, as you'll probably realize, the psalm that I just quoted and explained briefly a moment ago. So directly asked about his Christological status, Jesus decides to quote a psalm which is explicitly talking about beings who are not in fact Yahweh and yet are called gods. Why would he pick that psalm if the message he wanted to convey was that he is in fact in some sense God, that is, identical to Yahweh? Jesus continues, if he called them...
Okay, so did you catch what Alex is arguing here? Alex is arguing that Jesus is using Psalm 82, so he's quoting Psalm 82, not to agree with them that he is blaspheming by calling himself God, but that he is correcting them, and Jesus is actually saying that he is not God. Okay? This is the argument he's making, right? So let's just quickly, just for the sake of his argument, let's go to the verse. Okay, John 10:31. It says, the Jews picked up stones again to stone him. Jesus answered them, I've shown you many good works from the Father. For which of them are you going to stone me? And the Jews answered him, it is not for the good works that we're going to stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself God. Jesus answered them, is it not written in your law, I said you are gods? Okay, so this is the verse where Jesus is quoting Psalm 82. Okay? So Jesus says, is it not written in your law, I said you are gods? If he called them gods to whom the word of God came, and scripture cannot be broken, do you say of him, whom the Father consecrated and sent into the world, you are blaspheming? Because I said I am the Son of God? If I am not doing the works of my Father, then do not believe me. But if I do them, then even though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know and understand that the Father is in me, and I am in the Father. And again, they sought to arrest him, and he escaped from their hands. Okay, so does this look like Jesus is correcting them? Right? Because what Alex is saying, that Jesus is correcting them, and so Jesus is actually saying, oh no, I'm not God. I'm just as much God as any of you are, right? That's actually what he's saying. What's the problem? The problem is that in Psalm 82, Yahweh is actually talking to spiritual beings, right? That's the problem with Psalm 82, right? Let's go to Psalm 82. Okay, so Psalm 82 is really short, and it begins by saying this. It says, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. So just so for all of you Bible nerds out there, this word God is the word Elohim. Okay? Elohim has taken his place in the divine council. And in the midst of and you see this word for gods right here? This is the same word that's used over here. It is the exact same word. So it literally reads, Elohim has taken his place in the divine council in the midst of the Elohim. It's the same word. He holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute, because of the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hands of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, and this is the quote that Jesus quotes, you are gods. I said you are Elohim, sons of the Most High. All right, why would Jesus quote this psalm? Because it literally uses the word sons of the Most High. All of you. Nevertheless, you will die like men. Like men you shall die. And you will fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit the nations. Okay, so why would Jesus quote this psalm? Right? Jesus is not saying, I am not God. That's not what Jesus is saying. He's saying it's not blasphemy. Why is it not blasphemy for Jesus to call himself the sons of God? Because the angels are called the sons of God. In fact, it flat out says, I said you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, you shall die. Nevertheless, like men you shall die. So why is Jesus saying this? Because Jesus has made two claims to the Pharisees. The first claim is he's called himself the Son of God, right? The second thing, he is calling himself God. And so what Alex is arguing, and it is an interesting argument, Alex is arguing that Jesus is actually saying, I'm not a God. His argument is Jesus is correcting them. And so now to me, this is a very difficult argument to make because in the psalm, the word Elohim is being used. So this is not an easy argument for Alex to make, but let's see if he's able to argue it well.
Them gods, why wouldn't he call me God? The one who the Father has sent and set aside. So why then do you accuse me of blasphemy because I said I am God's son? Like in the divine council, you shall be called gods, that is, sons of the Most High. So it's a misunderstanding. Jesus immediately afterwards clarifies further and says, believe the works, that is the works of my Father through me, that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I am in the Father. Another pretty intense Christological claim. What does it mean? Let's turn to the most important Christological chapter in John's Gospel, which is, of course, chapter 17. Jesus is praying, first for his disciples, then for all of his believers. Remember, in John chapter 10 so far, Jesus has made two claims. I and the Father are one, and I am in the Father, and the Father is in me, addressing the relationship that he has to his Father, which David thinks is the two powers in heaven. What does Jesus say in his own words? John chapter 17, verses 20 onwards. My prayer is not for them alone, the disciples. I pray also for those who believe in me through their message, that is, all of you, that all of them may be one. Hen, H-E-N, the same Greek word used in John 10. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us. This is crucial, this is pivotal. When Jesus is asked to clarify his Christological status, what is his relationship to the Father? He says, I'm in the Father and the Father's in me. He then later prays that all of us will one day be in God in the same way, just as, kathos in the Greek, which doesn't just mean as, it means in the same way as, just as. If this is supposed to indicate that Jesus is claiming to be identical to Yahweh, what does that make the rest of us? And how, I'm interested in knowing, is David going to interpret these verses where Jesus is specifically asked to clarify his relationship to the Father and tells us that he is only in relationship with him in such a way that everybody else can be in relationship with them too. The same thing is true of another important...
Okay, so this is an interesting argument that Alex O'Connor is making. And Christians, those of you that are watching, you do need to have an answer for this. Right? Because here's the reality. If we are going to say, and I do actually maintain this, when Jesus uses phrases like, I and the Father are one, that is him saying, we are God. Like, that is what he's saying. Like, I actually believe this is a high Christology for the Gospel of John. And if we are going to make the argument that Jesus is saying, I am God, we need to have an answer for what Alex has just said, because Alex is right. Because when Jesus gives his priestly prayer nearing the end of the Gospel of John, he actually tells the Father, he actually says, I want them to be in me the same way I'm in you. So now what does that mean? And now, like this is not like a gotcha question from the atheist. Like, this is a real question. And Christians, we need to be able to have a real answer for this question. But let's see how he ends his argument.
Quote from John's Gospel, which is when Philip asks Jesus to show him the Father. What does Jesus say? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. Another intense Christological claim. He then follows up by saying, how can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing his work. So again, Jesus clarifies his relationship to the Father, this time saying that he doesn't speak on his own authority. But there's more. In the same chapter this time, chapter 14, just a few verses later, he says to those same disciples who he's just told, that if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, because the Father is in me, and I'm in the Father. He speaks of a future day past his crucifixion and says, on that day, verse 20, on that day you will realize that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. So to recap, Jesus is directly asked to clarify his relationship and his Christology to the...
So you see what Alex is getting at, right? This is the premise. This is the premise. If we are going to say these are high Christology verses that are saying that Jesus is God, what is the Christian going to do with these other verses that say you are in Christ? And you are in Christ the same way Christ is in the Father. You see, we need to have answers for these questions, and maybe we'll be able to produce them. But we'll see what comes in the conversation about this. All right, so let's go to the cross, or the closest thing to the cross.
Why do you think that Jesus prays before raising Lazarus from the dead?
The Old Testament says that God is the God of all flesh. If a divine being were to become incarnate, as is claimed of Jesus, and that divine being really became a flesh and blood human being like Jesus, then if he is if he's also had an eternal relationship with the Father.
David is waffling here. This is not looking good. This is David Wood's first question, and do you see how he's struggling for words? Right? Like, this is not looking good for David Wood. Let's see if he's able to rebound and actually produce an answer to the question.
Then I don't know if I'd expect him to be an atheist when he entered into creation. So in other words, if the Christian picture is correct, you've got Father and Son for all eternity. Son enters into creation. What's he going to be, an atheist? If he is going to, as part of it is, if he's going to be the ideal human or something like that.
Yeah.
And so
the Son of Man, one might say.
As far as what Jesus is.
Okay, so one thing I do like about Alex is he's very snarky, and he's so British in that way, right? Like, he's very sarcastic, very snarky, and some of his comebacks, they're like, they hit you and and you don't even feel the burn until a few seconds later, right? Like, it's just like he's a highly intelligent individual.
Is going to do, you would continue the eternal relationship that you've had with the Father, and you would do that through prayer. So
what I mean to say is, could Jesus have risen Lazarus from the dead of his own accord, on his own authority?
I suppose, yeah.
I suppose. Because
that whole authority has been given to him.
It's been given to him by God, right? Which, the way that I read that is that the Father has delegated the authority that is rightfully his to Jesus. And it's often said to me that Jesus raising people from the dead of his own authority is actually an indication of his divinity, because we have Old Testament passages of people raising people from the dead, like Elijah and Elisha, and the point is always made that, well, they pray before they rise from the dead. Jesus doesn't pray. But before he raises Lazarus in John chapter 11, he looks upward and says, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so they may believe that you have sent me. And when he says this, he cries out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. So Jesus is not only praying before raising Lazarus, but also saying that I always do this. It's just I'm doing it right now publicly, so there's no confusion that you're the one who sent me to do this. And so, even in instant...
Did you catch what he said? He is saying that Jesus just said that he always prays whenever he does a miracle or whenever he raises somebody from the dead, right? So he just made, in his own authority, he just made a claim that I don't think is true. Let's go to the text and let's see. Okay, so this is the raising of Lazarus, which begins in verse 38. And the prayer begins in verse 41 of John 11, verse 41, okay, which says this, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. So pay attention to what Jesus actually says in the prayer, right? Jesus says, Father, I thank you that you have heard me, and I know that you always hear me. Jesus is do you see what Alex did? He changed the meaning of what Jesus said. Jesus did not say, I always pray. Jesus says, whenever I pray, I know you always hear me. Right? And so then what does he say? So does he say this? Does he say that I'm praying so that you will give me the power to raise Lazarus? No. What does he say? But I said this on account of the people standing around, right? So Jesus is not praying for him. He's praying because of the people that are watching. Right? So do you see that? Jesus says, I know that you always hear me when I pray. He did not say that he prays every time he does a miracle. And so, like, Like this is known as an argument from authority, right? He's just making a claim as if it's a fact, right? But it's not a fact. That is not in the text. But if you fall for it, that is your fault, right? Because we need to be able to know when somebody's pulling a fast one on us, right? Just saying something with authority does not make the statement true. But let's see if David Wood catches it, and let's see if he does something about this.
Instances where Jesus appears to perform miracles of his own accord, such as calming the storm, or indeed raising other people from the dead, like the widow's child. He tells us here in John's Gospel that he always is in communication with God beforehand, but right now he's saying so publicly so that people will know that he sent him.
Do you see that? He did it again. He made a claim from authority. Let's see what Wood does with this.
Why does Jesus need to pray before he raises Lazarus from the dead?
This is the exact same chapter where Jesus declares himself the resurrection and the life.
That's right.
And it's in the same book where Jesus says that he's the one who raises the dead at the resurrection. Everyone who's in their graves will hear the voice of the Son of God.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
So...
Okay, so right now, David Wood is taking the bait. Right? He's taking the bait. Do you see what Alex did? He made a claim twice, and then at the end, he asked the question. Right? And so what he's doing, and actually from Alex's point of view, like, this is a brilliant move he's doing. It's deceptive, but it's a brilliant move. Because what he's done is he has just set the crowd up to believe that Jesus is praying so that he will get the power to raise Lazarus from the dead, right? But that's not in the text. That is not what the text says. And so he's made the claim twice, and now he is asked a question about the claim. And so his question is, why does Jesus need to pray before he raises Lazarus from the dead, right? So what is the bait? The bait is that Wood is going to focus on the question and not the false claim that he just made, right? And this is exactly what is happening. He has failed to address the false claim that he made because he's focused on answering the question at the end of the false claim. Let's see if he can recover.
If you're thinking that when we talk about Jesus, we're thinking of him as some rogue deity who does things on his own. I mean, that's basically the entire meaning of John chapter 5. John chapter 5 is basically one response to this. Jesus heals on the Sabbath. And this freaks him out because they say, hey, what are you doing? He says, well, the Father's working until now. I'm working too.
Yeah.
And so since the Father's working, I get to work. You all don't get to work. I get to work. And then they accuse him of claiming to be equal to God. And then he explains it. That it's a verse that Muslims use. They say, he says, by my own self, I can do nothing. But if you look at what he's saying, it's, I can do nothing separately from the Father. But that's the same chapter where he claims that he's the final judge, where he claims that he's the one who raises the dead at the resurrection. And he explains it and says, for the Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father. Mm-hmm. The only way you'd honor the Son the same way you honor the Father is if they have the same nature and attributes. You wouldn't honor anyone else like you honor God.
Interesting. Do you believe
so Jesus is saying that the reason he's the one who judges everything is so that we honor him the same way we honor the Father. That sounds... Do
you believe that the Father has a distinct loving relationship to the Son compared to the loving relationship he has to all of us, say?
Yep.
Only because I've heard you make this point before, that he says that it's that word "as" is quite important, what you just said, so that he will honor, so that they will honor me just as they honor the Father. That word "just as" is kathos, which I mentioned earlier. That's also used when Jesus says, so they will know that you have loved me just as you have loved them. So if we're going to be consistent in our usage of the term here, if Jesus is saying like that they will honor you that they'll honor me just as you honor the Father, then the loving relationship has to be treated in the same way, right?
Well, I think you can say, I'm trying to think, if you say that, I could say, I love this person just as I love my wife. And you'd be right. I could say, well, I just mean I love both of them, but not in the, that wouldn't necessarily be saying I love that person exactly as I love my wife.
But that's why there are two words in the Greek. That's why there's like the word for as.
No, I'm fine now.
Yeah, he has him rattled at this point. Another thing that he's doing is David Wood probably doesn't know Greek, right? Because David Wood, neither one of these two men are scholars, right? David Wood is an apologist, and he spends most of his time speaking with and debating Muslims, right? Muslims don't tend to ask questions about the Greek. His opponent, however, Alex, he does have he has a fair knowledge of basic Greek. I'm thinking from this, because when he's mentioning the word kathos, he is correct about that. But also, like, he's using his authority in the Greek language to intimidate him a little bit, because he's using knowledge that David Wood probably doesn't know if that's actually true, and he has to guess as to whether or not Alex O'Connor is actually telling him the truth here. But he's making an argument from authority, because he can just say, well, the Greek says this, and therefore this is what it means, right? And so he is forcing him to give Alex agreement, which is a fascinating strategy.
I'm talking about, you have to interpret words in context.
Yeah.
And what's the context of this? It's Jesus claims that since the Father's working, he's working also. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because the discussion among the rabbis was,
does God work on the Sabbath?
God work on the Sabbath?
Yeah.
And so Jesus is working. So God works on the Sabbath because he's upholding and sustaining the universe. Therefore,
Okay, friends, let me ask you this. What does God working on the Sabbath have to do with the question, why does Jesus need to pray in order to raise the dead? What, like, do you see what's going on? He has Wood on the ropes, right? Like, they're boxing right now, and O'Connor, he has David Wood on the ropes, and he is desperately trying to gain the upper hand. Like, he's desperately trying to get him with a hook or an uppercut, and right now he's just hitting the air.
Get to work on the Sabbath as well, and then, hey, you're claiming to be they think he's claiming to be another God. And he clarifies, no, by myself I can do nothing. He points this out, and in this context, he's the final judge. And so you will honor the Son just as you honor the Father. There, in context, it would be very strange to say, well, I just mean honor me in some sense, like you honor the Father, but not in that way. The Old Testament, Yahweh's the one who sets up his throne to judge. Jesus is the one who says, all judgment is given to him.
Given, yeah.
Yeah. And so if it's...
Do you see that? Man, O'Connor, he's a master at this. Like, he's toying with him like a cat with a mouse right now.
If all judgment is given to him, and keep in mind, the Old Testament says Yahweh is the one who's going to judge. And you're saying, yeah, but it's given to Jesus.
Yeah.
And he says it's so that we honor him the same way we honor the Father.
Yeah, okay, so I want to talk about this Sabbath moment, because this is quite important. This is in John chapter 5 as well. This whole episode sort of hinges on the idea that Jesus is working on the Sabbath. He says, my Father is working, so am I. So your interpretation of this is to say that, well, my Father in heaven, that is God, is working on the Sabbath, so am I, therefore I'm God. This story of Jesus working on the Sabbath is reported in multiple Gospels. In Mark's Gospel, when he's found working on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees say to him, this is Mark chapter 2, look, why are they doing that? It's that which is not lawful on the Sabbath. What does Jesus say in response? Have you not heard what David did? Have you not read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need of food? And they enter the house of God and take the food which is not lawful on the Sabbath. So Jesus justifies his breaking of the Sabbath by referring to another human being who also broke the Sabbath. He then tells us that the Sabbath was made for mankind and not mankind for the Sabbath. A very famous quote. The Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Bearing in mind that although...
The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath.
Yes, bear in mind that although in the Greek, the definite article is given to Jesus when he uses the term Son of Man.
You see what he's doing? Very, very interesting strategy. Argument from authority.
It's complicated by the fact that Son of Man without the definite article is just a way of saying human being. So there are some scholars such as Morris Casey who believe that these Son of Man sayings have been corrupted, at least some of them, from originally saying a Son of Man, or the Son of Man in the sense of just meaning a human being. Now, why would that interpretation be correct here? Because Jesus says, firstly, when he's accused of breaking the Sabbath, he says, well, David did the same thing. Was David sinning? The implication is no, which means it can't just be God who breaks the Sabbath. He then says that the Sabbath was made for man, humans, not humans or man for the Sabbath. Therefore, he says, the word is therefore, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. If the Son of Man in some context just means a human being, that's how early church fathers interpreted it, for example. In fact, some of the early church fathers translated the Son of Man as the Son of Mary, because they thought it was Jesus indicating that he was the son of a human being and he was only born of Mary. Given that undertone for this phrase, the Son of Man, how else can I read this passage except Jesus saying, yeah, I'm working on the Sabbath, so did David, and that wasn't wrong. The Sabbath was made for mankind, therefore mankind is Lord of the Sabbath.
Okay, so now Alex has just made his first mistake in the cross conversation, right? If you're ever in a debate, don't ever ask your opponent, how do you do this? Why? Because now you can just tell them, right? Now you can you don't even have to be right, especially in this type of situation, right? Because Alex asked the question, how else could you interpret this? Now, here's the thing. All you have to do is just offer an interpretation. You don't have to believe it. It doesn't have to be correct. It doesn't even really need to be sound. You just need to offer any type of example of how you can read the text a different way. So now he has just given David Wood a golden opportunity. Let's see if he's able to hit this baseball out of the park.
If it's only God who can work on the Sabbath, then why does Jesus appeal to David?
You're talking about two completely different passages. You're talking about this situation, and Jesus, I was talking to a Jewish guy in Israel, and he's not a Christian, but he said, hey, Jesus' way won. Jesus' way actually won.
Jesus,
the way of Jesus won.
Oh, sure.
He viewed Jesus as like a religious reformer sent against religious extremism and so on. There, Jesus is talking about like preserving life and so on. The accusation in John 5 is different, but I'm pointing to John because you're going with John.
Yeah.
In John 5, he says the Father's working, and so he gets to work too.
That's right.
And again, if you read this, there's no way to interpret this as Jesus claiming to be some, just another human being or something like that.
Well, I don't think Jesus is claiming to be just another human.
Okay, David Wood saw the opportunity and he took it. Good job for David Wood. But he's been on the ropes like the whole time. Like the whole time they've been conversing like this. And so now he needs to regain some ground. Let's see if he can.
Human being. But although we are talking about two different passages here, if the reason that Jesus gives, because bear in mind there are multiple ways to interpret this. When he says, well, God's working, so why not I? There are multiple ways to interpret this. Either Jesus is, again, quite explicitly claiming to be God, which again is quite mystifying given that this doesn't seem to provoke the same kind of reaction. If it's well recognized that God is the Lord of the Sabbath and Jesus is claiming himself as a title, the Son of Man, to be Lord of the Sabbath, or in this instance, just claiming the authority because God is working, so am I, it's strange that it doesn't cause the same kind of fuss. But the other interpretation is that Jesus is saying, well, if God can work on the Sabbath, why not anybody else? If God can work, why not me? And that just doesn't, your interpretation just doesn't square with me with Mark's gospel. I mean, the question I asked was, why does he refer to David in justifying his working on the Sabbath?
We're talking about John.
Yes.
You can have different reasons for doing things in different situations. I mean, as far as John, so Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. In his defense, Jesus said to them, "My Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working." For this reason, they tried all the more to kill him, not only because he was breaking the Sabbath, but was even calling God his own Father, making himself
him equal to God.
with God.
Yes.
And so that's when Jesus goes, and if he's trying to say something about it's okay to break the Sabbath, or you don't have to work on the Sabbath anymore, or something like that, it's a strange direction to go in that he makes all these claims. He can do only what the Father sees, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. For just as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, even so the Son gives life to whom he is pleased to give it. The Father judges no one, but has entrusted all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father. Whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father. And that's when he goes on to say that he's the one who raises the dead. Time is coming and has now come when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself. And he has given him authority to judge because he is the Son of Man. And then he goes on to say that the dead are going to be raised. My point is zeroing in on one little point and saying, maybe this is just, you're missing kind of the big picture. This is...
But I'm noticing the words granted and given or authority there. This idea that Jesus raises the dead is not exactly clear in John chapter 5. Like if we look at the words that we're actually dealing with here.
Okay, so this is good. David Wood has taken control of the conversation now, which is exactly what he needs to do in order to recover. So, let's see how it goes.
The Father judges no one, but has entrusted all judgment to the Son. Presumably the Father could judge if he wanted to. He's made a decision to entrust this to the Son, meaning that the Son doesn't have this power necessarily. If the Son has this power necessarily, it's not something that needs to be entrusted to him in the way that the Father then would not have it. He then says, "Very truly I say to you, whoever hears my word and believes him who has sent me has eternal life." And goes on to say that the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live.
Hear the voice of the Son of God.
Yeah. Now,
he's the Son of God, right? Jesus?
That's right.
You're agreeing that he's claiming to be the Son of God.
Yeah, so they'll hear his voice and they'll be raised from the dead. But
okay, so finally David Wood, he's starting to bite back a little bit, right? And so now he just got, and this is important because a key part to arguing something is getting your opponent to agree with you. So now he just got Alex to agree with him that Jesus is claiming to be the Son of God. Okay, so this is good. So he's not bouncing back super quick, but he's starting to gain momentum. So let's see if he can win this thing.
How do we, who is doing the raising here? And how do you know?
You're saying we're going to hear, people are going to, so you're saying someone else is raising them.
God.
When they hear the voice of the Son of God. So
That's
they're
right.
dead. They're just bones. They hear the voice of the Son of God. And then someone else raises them.
For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son to also have life in himself.
Life in himself.
Yes, any power that Jesus has here is given to him by the Father. Why is Jesus, if God, in need of being given this power by the Father?
This is the exact same issue that you have in Daniel 7, where the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven approaches the Ancient of Days, and he is given authority, glory, and sovereign power.
That's
so
right.
it's why is he being given authority and glory and sovereign power?
Yeah.
But even before that, it's the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven.
Yeah.
That's how he approaches. But again, it's Yahweh who comes with the clouds. So he's Yahweh, and then something happens, and then he's given...
The Son of Man is Yahweh. Do you think that was how Daniel 7 was interpreted by anybody before?
Daniel saw a vision.
That's
but
right.
This is one of the issues as far as this is one of the issues that comes up in the two powers in heaven.
Yeah.
Because it's, again, Yahweh is the only one who comes with the clouds in the Old Testament. And here you have the Son of Man who receives worship and so on, and is worshipped by all nations. But notice, he approaches, and then he's given authority, glory, and sovereign power. But if you if you line that up with the Creed in Philippians, if you line that up with John 1 and so on, you get kind of a big picture. And you can take like John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, and then the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That's after all things are created through him. And you find the same thing in Philippians 2, early Christian creed. When it's in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant. So these are, you have someone who is in nature God over here, someone who is the Word, through whom all things are created,
yes.
and then enters creation, and then lives as Jesus, dies. And I would interpret it, since you have the ending in Matthew where Jesus approaches and he's worshiped there, and he says that all authority in heaven and earth has been given to him. So the idea is he becomes a servant. He's in very nature God. He takes on the nature of a servant, and then he lives as a servant. And the irony of this statement where he says the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. The irony there is he's the Son of Man. He's supposed to be served by all. And he says that he came to serve. And so he's living as a servant during this life. Then he dies. He rises from the dead.
There's a lot here, right?
Yeah.
I want to go right back, because we started with this idea of the Son of Man coming on the clouds, meaning that he's Yahweh. Do you think that's how Daniel interpreted his vision? Do you think that's
I believe Daniel saw a vision and recorded his vision.
Do you think that's how the Sanhedrin interpreted Daniel 7? When Jesus comes for his trial, and he quotes Daniel 7 and says that you'll see the Son of Man riding on the clouds of heaven. Do you think that the problem there was that Jesus was claiming to be God, and that's something that no human being can do? Because Daniel 7 is part of the Jewish scripture. They were expecting the coming of this Son of Man.
Okay. He has now asked the same question twice, and David Wood has not answered it. Okay? For any Christian that's watching this, there's one answer to this question, right? There's one answer to this question, and the answer is yes. Yes, yes, yes. This is what the Jewish people thought of Daniel 7. Yes, they would have made the connection to the two powers in heaven. David Wood has made the argument for the two powers in heaven. He needs to stick to his argument, and he needs to say yes, and then he needs to tell him why the answer is yes. Like, that is what he needs to do. And part of me is like, oh, just say yes. Stop avoiding the answer. Just say, like, if you have done your research on something and you know you're right, then you need to back it up. And that is on you, right? So the onus now is on David Wood. He needs to say yes, and he needs to tell him why. And if he does not know why, he loses the debate. Like that is the reality here. If you are ever in a debate and you have done your research for your side, for the argument that you are giving, you need to stick by your argument. And if you can't stick by your own argument, you by definition are yielding. You are surrendering in essence. That is what's happening. He cannot surrender his side. Let's see what he does.
So if it's obvious that the Son of Man was going to be Yahweh, then the Sanhedrin should have expected that the coming Son of Man would have been Yahweh. They might have thought that Jesus wasn't him. But do you think that the Sanhedrin were expecting whoever the rightful Son of Man was, who was to come, would be identical to Yahweh? And if not,
yes.
Why did they not read that into the passage as obviously as you think that they should have done?
Yes.
People were basically confused by these passages. That's the impression you get. They go in all sorts of different directions, and, oh, this is referring to the Messiah. No, this is referring to some sort of angel. No, this is referring to this. No, that's... I'm talking about what the text says. The Son of Man comes with the clouds of heaven. All before that, it's always Yahweh who comes on the clouds. And so if you were looking at that and you didn't, if you didn't have the idea of, wait a minute, it just can't be. It's impossible that is referring to God, because you've got the Ancient of Days right there. If you're not reading, I mean, and really, I don't know. I don't even know what to do if you're saying that I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about anyone.
Yeah.
If you're reading that and going, no, it doesn't seem like this is God. He comes with the clouds of heaven, but then he's worshipped by all nations and has an everlasting kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
If you're just reading that, if you put it this way, if you didn't have the Ancient of Days in the picture and you're reading this description, comes on the cloud of heavens, worshipped by all nations, they obviously God.
Yeah, so
the mystery comes in. The mystery comes in when it's, wait a minute, we've got the Ancient of Days here, so this is sounding like
that's right.
two divine beings, and we just can't have that.
Real quick, so we've gone through about 20 minutes. David, are you comfortable staying here, or do you want to ask Alex some questions now?
Okay, so what just happened here? He gave him a soft yes, and he gave him a long-winded yes, right? So he didn't actually use the word yes, but he did argue for his point. I don't think it helped him by being so long-winded in his reply to this, because right away he should have said yes, and then he should have given the explanation. What he actually did here is he gave the explanation to why the answer is yes, but he never actually said yes, right? Which makes it weak. It's still a yes, but it's a weak way of basically standing up for your own argument. I'm a little bit surprised at this because David Wood normally, like, he's a pretty aggressive personality if you've ever seen any of his videos. And so I am kind of surprised, but it really does seem like Alex, I really think he winded him in the early part of the discussion. But now it looks like Ruslan is going to take control of the discussion, and he's now that because remember, this started out with one question from Alex O'Connor, and he has dominated the discussion thus far. Now let's see what happens when we get the other side of the coin and David Wood is able to ask some questions.
I'm hoping to nail this down because, of course, the point was or is in the Christological dispute that Jesus is accused of blasphemy at his trial.
Man, like this is crazy. Alex O'Connor, do you see what he just did? Ruslan is the leader of the debate, right? Like he's the guy in charge of the debate, and he just gave an opportunity to David Wood to to control the debate, and Alex, he's not having that, like, at all. And what he has just done is brilliant. He's just taken all the authority away from Ruslan, and he's taken control of the conversation again. Like, Alex O'Connor, like, he really knows what he's doing here.
And that this is evidence that he was claiming to be God through his identification with the divine Son of Man, because that's how it's interpreted by the high priest, because he accuses him of blasphemy. Does that mean that the high priest was expecting the Son of Man to be Yahweh himself? Do you think that that is the interpretation that the high priest had of the Danielic vision of the Son of Man?
I would say...
Okay, so Alex, he is really pressing him now. Like, he could have just let this go. He's now asked this question 3 times. David Wood needs to stick to his guns now, right? He needs to stick to his guns. Like, he cannot back away from this.
They would obviously have interpreted the that passage in Daniel, or claimed to be the Son of Man, in that sense. If you're just saying, "Hey, I'm a son of man," I think they'd be fine with it.
Well, yeah, of course, in the Aramaic in which Daniel 7 is written, it's one like a son of man, one like Bar Nash, which just means one like a human being.
Yeah, so you'd clarify that, and that's the point, like a human being, and yet he comes with the clouds of heaven. So he's coming with the clouds of heaven, he's Yahweh, and yet he's like a son of a man.
That's right.
Yeah.
You understand that in the history
as far as how they would interpret it, they could have a range of interpretations that we don't know what this means. But we know the guy who built my cousin's table in Nazareth should not be making this claim.
Sure. Is that enough to be... So suppose that their interpretation was a messianic vision of Daniel 7. This carpenter claiming to be the Messiah, would that have been enough to accuse him of blasphemy?
Claiming to be the Messiah is not a death sentence. All kinds of people claim to be the
And
Messiah.
so the reason I'm pressing this point is because when I say, did the high priest believe that the Son of Man was going to be Yahweh himself, I think that's quite implausible. And I think you recognize that in saying, well, look, there are loads of ideas that they could have had. It was quite confusing. But if Jesus wouldn't be accused of blasphemy for merely claiming to be the Messiah, if you had a messianic interpretation, he wouldn't be accused of blasphemy for claiming to embody the nation of Israel, if you have the idea that the Son of Man represents Israel, which is another view. It has to be.
Israel comes on the clouds of heaven.
It has to be.
And is worshipped by all nations.
I'm not. That's my interpretation. I'm saying that in the history of the interpretation of Daniel 7, that has been a popular interpretation.
Yeah,
of course, the four beasts which come before represent different nations, and the one like the Son of Man is Israel. But the question I'm asking you is, surely you recognize that if the idea is that claiming to be the Messiah or something like that is not enough for a death sentence.
That's right.
Then what Jesus has to have done in that trial, in order to get a death sentence, must have been to say something that the high priest immediately interpreted as him claiming to be Yahweh. That means that he has to expect that the coming Son of Man would be Yahweh himself. Is that what you think what the high priest thought of Daniel's vision?
One, you just made an awesome case for me, right? If he's just thinking of
He's right. Right? He's right. Alex O'Connor, his whole argument is that Jesus never claimed to be God. And what did he just do? He just dropped his cards, right? He's holding his cards close to the vest, and he dropped them. And now his cards are all over, and he's all mixed up. Why? He just admitted that the reason why the high priest wanted to kill Jesus is because Jesus was arguing that he was God, and the whole point of the debate is, did Jesus claim to be God, right? So Alex, I think he just lost. Like, I think he just lost now, because he just admitted that the only reason that Jesus would be put to death at the trial is because he was claiming to be God. So I mean, it was kind of a fumble, and it was totally like, it was totally his own doing. He just shot himself in the foot here. I don't know how he can come back from this, but he's a smart guy. Let's see if he can manage it.
If he's just thinking of the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven as the Messiah, then, okay, this guy claimed to be the Messiah. Let's maybe we have to deal with the Romans or something like that. But it's not this terrier clothes blasphemy sort of thing. Mm-hmm. What you find in that passage, people struggle with that. Again, the reason is because it sounds like it's talking about Yahweh when the Ancient of Days is Yahweh. That's it. So you come up, you try to explain it in other ways. Could this be the Messiah? It just doesn't fit. Could this be the nation of Israel? It doesn't fit. There are all these interpretations, but it's clear if a guy says, you will see the Son of Man coming with at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. Yeah, it doesn't seem like they were taking that to just be a claim to be the Messiah.
That interpretation, and you're right, that I'm bolstering the case here that Jesus must have been claiming to be Yahweh. What I'm saying is that if your position is...
He just admitted it a second time, you guys. Like, he's not helping himself here. He is handing the debate to David Wood at this point. He just repeated himself in that, and he actually said Jesus must have claimed to be God. His whole argument is Jesus never claimed to be God. That is his entire argument. He has no argument now. It's just, the debate is over.
Is correct, and that is the only thing that he could have been accused of blasphemy for, then you have to presuppose that the high priest had that interpretation of Daniel 7, which just seems so implausible to me, that that's what they thought Daniel 7 meant, that that's what they thought at that time that it meant, that this Son of Man, who they did expect to come, would be Yahweh himself. Is that what you think they thought? Because you have to, for this to run.
He's correct in that statement, by the way. You have to. And on his side of the debate, again, he has made the claim, his whole argument, the argument of David Wood, is that there are two powers in heaven. In the Jewish scriptures, the Jews knew about the two powers in heaven because they read their own scriptures, and that Jesus claimed he is the second power. That is David Wood's entire argument, and he needs to back it up now. And now, for like the fourth golden opportunity that Alex O'Connor has given him, will he do what he needs to do to win this debate?
I don't have the records of the high priest. If he says this guy just claimed to be the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven, and again, if you just read the passage, if you just read in Daniel 7, if you didn't have the Ancient of Days there, it would be indisputable. This is talking about God. But you've got the Ancient of Days there. So what's the context of this? First century, they're dealing with this two powers in heaven issue. And they don't know how to deal with it. They're coming up with all sorts of explanations for what this second power is. And then Jesus claims to be one of them.
When does the two powers in heaven, idea, heresy, if you want to call it that now, when does that begin to emerge?
BC.
What evidence do you have of the popularity of the two powers in heaven idea in Second Temple Judaism?
You guys, there is so much evidence in Second Temple Judaism for the two powers in heaven. There's so much evidence. The Book of Jubilees, the Book of Enoch, the second power. In fact, you guys, in the Book of Enoch, which was written before the time of Jesus, the Book of Enoch was a Jewish apocalypse that was incredibly popular during Jesus' day. And in the apocalypse of Enoch, there is the Messiah figure, and the Messiah figure sits on the throne with Yahweh in heaven, right? There's again, David Wood, who, and again, I'm rooting for David Wood. He has been given a golden opportunity. All he has to do is say the Book of Enoch. That's all he has to do here. There's so much evidence that the two powers in heaven what came before Jesus came, and that they were having these debates. How do we know this? Because 200 years later, the rabbis are still having the debates. But they're having the debates because the two powers in heaven is not only in the Old Testament, but it's also in the Jewish writings that are being written at this time. And so what David Wood needs to do is he just needs to say the Book of Enoch. The debate is over. Because Alex, he's already conceded his position, and he's just given him, this is how you win the debate, right? Give me some evidence that it was BC. Now, David Wood says it's BC. He knows it's BC. All he has to do now is just say the Book of Enoch. That's all he has to do. Let's see if he does. For the 6th or 7th time. Let's see if he can clench this.
The main discussion that's used, like in Siegel's book, is the later rabbinic commentaries. But so you have
in the late 1st and 2nd century, right?
Yeah, that's when they're talking about
it. That's when it actually becomes a big deal.
That's when Jewish orthodoxy is forming.
So in other words, it's a relatively fringe position beforehand.
No, it was fairly popular.
He's correct. It was not fringe. It was fairly popular. So David Wood finally he's giving answers he needs to be giving here.
Evidence for that, as far as I understand, it's a relatively fringe position.
You have all these issues that are in the Old Testament, but then you have the Targums. You have the Targums that are they're putting Old Testament passages into Aramaic and so on, and they start giving some interesting translations of some of these passages and so on, and treating. There's a lot of other issues, like even with the name and with the word, and that's why Boyarin says the ideas are already there, because you have passages where they're interpreting the word, where they're interpreting the word of God as a personal agent and so on. So the idea is it's drawing a parallel between that and John's Gospel.
Here's
But,
James McGrath on the two powers. The evidence surveyed thus far gives no support for dating the origins of the controversy even to the 2nd century. It is, of course, possible that the controversy did arise in the 2nd century, but it has not yet had sufficient impact to leave any clear or explicit trace in the traditions and literature from that period.
When you have the rabbis forming Jewish orthodoxy, they're clearly responding to the issue of the two powers in heaven.
Yeah, when's that happening?
Yeah, that's later, but they're talking about things that happened earlier.
But because remember, what we're talking about here is the idea of the Son of Man that the high priest would have had at Jesus' trial. If the two powers in heaven idea is something that only emerges in the late 1st and 2nd century.
No, that's when it's being labeled a heresy. That's when they're declaring it a heresy, right. And they're setting out to
But what I'm
refute
asking is why is it that if this is already a controversy that has emerged and is extant to the extent that the high priest believes it, then why is it leaving no trace in our traditions and literature from that period?
What traditions do you have? What commentaries are you talking about from the 1st century?
Well, that's a silence thing, because I don't have commentary. What commentaries do I have that don't mention it? That's a bit of a broad question. I'm asking what commentaries you have that do.
If the rabbis are talking about these earlier controversies and they're dealing with, because you have the Christians went one way with it.
Yes.
You had the Gnostics. It became an issue for the Gnostics because the Gnostics interpreted, they believed in the two powers in heaven, and they said they're basically in conflict. The two powers are in conflict. Yep. And so the Gnostics ran with that. And then you had Jewish mystics who were running with the issue.
You think the Gnostics believed in the two powers in heaven heresy as you've described it?
They believed in the two powers.
Because as far, and I really actually don't know.
They went in a completely different direction. So the Christian direction was father and son. You've got Father and Son. You've got Son of Man coming with the clouds and Ancient of Days. You've got God and the Word of God. You've got Paul calling the Father God and calling Jesus Lord and so on. So you see it all over there. They have the two powers, but the two powers are in harmony and have always been so.
Yeah.
The Gnostics believed in the two powers, and they believe that they're in conflict. And so anyway, the point is,
okay. Look, I really don't know here, but I think that this hinges on the evidence that the two powers in heaven idea is a popular enough controversy in the time of Jesus' lifetime that the high priest of the Sanhedrin would have believed it. And as far as I can see, the evidence...
You can tell what he believed by how he reacts.
So you do think that this is what he believed then? Like, you're committing yourself to that view, in other words, that this is the view that the high priest...
Oh, finally. Like finally. David Wood should have just said yes like 20 minutes ago when he asked it the first time. Like, fine. Okay, so Alex O'Connor has gotten the yes out of him. He clearly does not think that the two powers in heaven went back this far. But honestly, I think Alex thinks he knows more about it than he actually does. Because it is clear, like, the two powers in heaven, it's in the Old Testament itself. It is in Genesis. Like, I promise you, every Jew, much less the high priest, knew about Genesis 19 and that Yahweh rained down fire from Yahweh. I promise you, he knew about the prophets and the way the prophets talk about how Yahweh is sending Yahweh. And I guarantee you the high priest knew about the book of Enoch. How do I know that? Because Jude knew about the book of Enoch, and he quotes the book of Enoch in the book of Jude. Like, but David Wood, if he would have just come out and just said this earlier, he would be in control of this debate. But he isn't. But the problem now is Alex O'Connor does not realize the favor that he has just done David Wood, because he is actually handing him the debate, but O'Connor doesn't know enough about Jewish studies. Like, that, this is what is going on here. But I don't think O'Connor realizes this is what's going on here.
Priest had of Daniel 7, that the Son of Man would be Yahweh, that even before Jesus came along, This high priest must have read Daniel 7.
I have
and
no
gone,
idea. He
"That
could have
man
a
must-"
range of ideas.
No, but
So you can just say you can't claim to
say
be
you have
this
no
guy.
idea, because if your whole claim is that Jesus couldn't have been accused of blasphemy for anything other than claiming to be God,
I've never said that.
in this instance, like, what other interpretation of Daniel 7 do you think would this, let me put it this way, what interpretation other than the one that I've just described of Daniel 7 could the high priest have that would cause him to accuse Jesus of blasphemy based on the words that he said?
As far as you can tell in commentary, they can't figure out what it means, right? And so the question is, how is the high priest interpreting what Jesus is saying? So how are they interpreting what Jesus is saying?
And Jesus is identifying himself as the Son of Man, who they already expected to come from Daniel 7.
Yes.
And they interpret that as him claiming to be Yahweh.
Yes. The answer is yes.
It really looks like
Because
that.
I think
Yes.
that's what you have to say, right? You have to say that they think he's claiming to be Yahweh. But in order to say that, you have to believe that that is how he interpreted Daniel 7.
Yes.
Look,
Yes.
no, I don't. He could have a range of interpretations and say, like put it this way. Look at what the high priest is doing when he says, don't keep us in suspense any longer. Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?
Yeah.
He's asking for clarification on
That's
what he's
right.
saying. What are you saying? What are you telling us?
Okay, so bearing in mind that one interpretation of Daniel 7 throughout history, even after the advent of Christianity, is that Daniel 7 is a messianic prophecy about the coming Messiah. If Jesus is asked, are you the Messiah? And he responds by quoting Daniel 7, if one of the interpretations of Daniel 7 is that it's talking about the Messiah, then why would they not just think he was claiming to be the Messiah?
He obviously didn't give them that impression if they said he deserves death for it. And by the way, this is connected. You can actually tell what happens. I mean, you brought up the passage in Acts 7. I mean,
Yes.
Stephen is giving his entire case for belief in Jesus as the Messiah. They never get violent. Then he rebukes them the harshest way you can possibly. You killed your ancestors killed all the prophets, and you guys killed the Messiah. If they're just going to get ticked off at rebuke or insults or something like that, that would have been the time to do it. It's when he says, I
they
see
get
the
ticked
Son
off
of
at
Man.
blasphemy.
It's
Yeah.
when I see the Son of Man. That's when they cover their ears. They cover their ears, they charge him, and they kill him. So you can do the same thing. Why are they why are they interpreting that as
Exactly,
why
yeah.
aren't they interpreting that as he's just saying that Jesus is the Messiah?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay,
Why
fellas.
do they think that?
We got to move to Q&A. We've gone way over the open dialogue.
Apologies,
so if you have
everybody.
a question, line up over there while I let you guys finish your thoughts. Guys, hey, oh gosh.
One, two.
All right, so check it out. Right here where Ray is. You guys.
All right, that, ladies and gentlemen, is a sign the arguments were not argued very well, because there is a ton of questions and an entire crowd of people are streaming to the microphones because there are so many loose ends, there's so many holes in both of their arguments, and people have got a lot of questions. Okay. What is my evaluation of this debate? My evaluation of this debate is Alex O'Connor dominated. He absolutely dominated the cross. He had full control of the conversation at pretty much every moment. He was able to very carefully craft his questions, and to be honest with you, he even used deception in how he was crafting his questions. He was talking to the audience just as often as he was talking to his opponent. And quite frankly, the way you win debates is not by convincing your opponent, because you will never convince your opponent. Like, that is the whole thing. If you could convince your opponent, they're a bad opponent. Like, that's just the way it is. The goal of the debate, the way you win, is you convince the audience. You do not convince your opponent. And Alex O'Connor, that was his mission, and he was dominating the conversation the whole time. In my opinion, his actual argument for that Jesus did not say that he was God, I was not impressed by his argument. I thought his argument was actually really weak. But here's the thing. You can win a debate even if your side is wrong. Many debates are won by the people that do not have the correct position. But you don't have to be right to win a debate. You just have to argue it better than the other person. If you are good at arguing, you don't have to be right to win. And that is a reality. And so like Alex O'Connor, he maintained control the entire cross-X portion of the conversation. Even when Ruslan, who is the moderator, took control, Alex O'Connor, he was able to take control back from the moderator. Like I've never seen anything on this level before. And as for the other side, in my opinion, I think David Wood, he had the strongest argument. He had a very interesting argument. He had a very unique argument. I think it's clearly portrayed in the Gospel of John, and many atheist scholars will agree Jesus does claim to be God in the Gospel of John. In fact, for centuries, atheist scholars maintain the position that the Gospel of John was written hundreds of years after Jesus because its Christology is too high. And so I actually think David Wood, he had the superior argument. He did not argue it well, though, especially during the cross-X. He did not argue it well. He lost control. He was on the ropes the majority of the time. He was given golden opportunity after golden opportunity after golden opportunity to win that thing. And he never took it. He never took it. He was if they were boxing, he was on the ropes the entire time. All 12 rounds he was on the ropes. Who won the debate? David Wood won the debate, but he did not win the debate. Alex O'Connor gave him the debate at the end. Like as far as I'm concerned, like Alex, he literally admitted Jesus was claiming to be God, and that's why the high priest wanted to kill him. Like and as soon as you admit that, the debate is over, friends. Like the debate is over. And so Alex O'Connor, in my opinion, Alex O'Connor both won and lost the debate. He won in every way imaginable until he admitted his side was wrong. And I don't think he did it on purpose. I think, but this is a problem, people. Sometimes you can get so caught up in being right that you become wrong. And I think that is exactly what happened in this debate. And so the victory goes to David Wood. David Wood wins the debate, but he barely wins. Like he barely wins. And even though like he had the superior argument, he should have been able to draw out awesome clash. And if he would have done his research properly, he would have known he should have been in all of the Second Temple literature. He should have been in the Book of Enoch. He should know the Book of Enoch is in line with the two powers in heaven. He should have been in the Book of Jubilees. He should have been in the Apocrypha. He should have been in anything a Jewish person wrote during the Second Temple. He should have been able to quote that stuff. And so he would have much more easily been able to win this debate. I do think he got lucky, and I think that Alex, I think his arrogance got the better of him. I think he knew he had him on the ropes and he let his defenses down, and then he accidentally agrees with the main premise of his opponent's argument. But that can happen, right? So that's a lesson for any of you that are at home, right? Like this can happen to people. Like when you let your guard down, when you think, "Oh, I'm winning," they don't have a chance of coming back. You can actually give them the victory when you lower your walls, when you lower your defenses, and you allow yourself to get a big head, and you think, "Oh, I'm pretty awesome at this," and in my opinion, he actually handed the debate to David Wood on a silver platter. But like both of these guys, they're really intelligent guys. They're both really smart. They're just both really brilliant minds, and it was really cool that we were able to see these two duke it out the way they did. And so that's my take on the debate. now I want to know, what do you guys think? Do you agree with me? Do you think David Wood won the debate? Maybe I'm too hard on David Wood. Maybe he did a better job than I think he did. I just wasn't impressed. Like I was really disappointed. I've seen this guy goes toe to toe with Muslims and he crushes them. Like I've seen some of his debates. David Wood, he gets put into corners that you wouldn't think that he would be able to get himself out of, and he has such a brilliant mind. He does. And so I kind of thought like he wasn't on his game in this debate. What do you guys think? Was I too hard on David Wood? Was I too easy on Alex O'Connor? Maybe there's more mistakes I didn't see. What do you guys think? Maybe did the atheists win? Like maybe just because I'm a pastor and because I'm a Christian, maybe I'm letting my own biases get in the way. Tell me what you think in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe if this video was a blessing to you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll catch you guys in the next video.